Local Food Council. We are sponsored by the Purdue Extension Office, and we've been hosting monthly public meetings here, mostly through Zoom this year, trying to build up awareness and community engagement across the different food scopes sort of that we're interested in. Local sourcing of food access, such as pantries and such, and then also with health and nutrition awareness, education and awareness. So kind of covering all the different bands of food in our community across Johnson County. We are still a growing organization, so we're always looking for people to kind of join the meetings and learn about more. We'd like to try to host some of our local food experts like Laura here to be able to present on topics that may be of interest to some of the community members, or just to kind of there again get that engagement in the community and education pieces for different foodstuffs. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura to introduce herself. And I think, do you have presenter access?
I think I do. I think Sarah set that up for me.
Okay.
So we'll give it a try and see how it works.
That sounds great. And I'm going to turn my camera off and mute myself so I don't interrupt while you're presenting, but you can go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
Let me see, get the screen share started. Okay. So let me know. There, can you all see, do you all see like one slide?
Yep.
Okay, great. And can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Great, well, my name is Laura Northrup, Poland, and I'm here to talk about my farm, Strawberry Moon Farm. And I'm so excited to be here at the Johnson County Local Food Council. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to everyone who showed up. I'm really excited to meet you all and talk to you all about this project. One thing to note, we are a young and growing farm, so you'll hear me tonight talk about some projects that are fully completed, but also some projects that are still in progress and some plans for future projects that haven't even been started yet. But I talked to Amy prior to this, and she thought there might be some value in discussing the plans for the future, even though they're not completed yet. We specialize in earth-positive agriculture and native plant crops. So there is an intent toward conservation and restorative agriculture, in addition to producing food for the local community. A little bit of information about myself. I'm from Johnson County originally. I actually grew up in Greenwood. My husband and I have moved around a bit since then, lived in a few different places, but ultimately we decided that Johnson County was the only place that really felt like home. So we purchased our farm in Franklin in 2015, and we currently live on the land with our 5 cats and 10 hens and 6 roosters. Oh, I've progressed a little too fast, but one thing about me is that I began my career as a software engineer, and now I feel privileged to be farming full-time, and I try to apply a similar design approach to the land that I always use towards my engineering. And then another interesting fact, the name of the farm, Strawberry Moon Farm, it actually comes from the Algonquian language's name for June's full moon. So the strawberry moon coincides with the harvest time for the native wild strawberry, and that's how it got its name. The native wild strawberry is one of the first ripe fruits of the year, so that's the cause for a real celebration. And the original inhabitants of Johnson County, who were the Miami people and also the Lenape people, those tribes both spoke forms of the Algonquian language. Here's some values and goals that have really influenced the development path of the farm. good local food. I believe that good food should be delicious, exciting, and nourishing. Vibrant communities. We hope to enhance the community by sharing food and making food available in abundance. Healthy soil. We try to honor the soil by, first of all, adding nothing harmful to it, but also by nourishing the soil food web, by planting lots of trees and perennials, taking steps to reduce erosion, and trying to keep nutrients inside the soil where they do the most good. Clean water directly relates to healthy soil because soil is our natural water filter. So by caring for our soil, we care for the water too. Fresh air, plants cleanse the air, so try to grow plenty of plants and trees. Wildlife, big and small. We try to welcome wildlife to the farm by growing a wide variety of plants, including plants that are green at different times of the year, and plants that bloom at different times of the year, and plants that provide shelter. We try to promote continuous learning by studying the work of those who've come before us, learning from what they've already tried, keeping really good notes and records, and making improvements whenever possible. Fully functional ecosystems, that's where my engineering training comes to work. I love to see all these elements coming together. People, plants, animals, insects, soil, and water, all balanced in a self-sustaining system. And lastly, but certainly not least, respect and dignity for all. And we try to contribute to that just by doing our best to treat animals, people, natural resources, and ecosystems with respect. So I've said that the farm specializes in native plant foods, and I want to talk a little bit about why I chose that specialization. I first became interested in these plants after meeting with officers from the local NRCS office and SWCD, that's Natural Resource Conservation Service and Soil and Water Conservation. Both representatives recommended native plants and offered guidance and possible funding for native restorative plantings. So with this information, I began to research what I could grow that would fit both the conservation goals and still meet my farming goals to produce food for the community. Eventually, I was able to come up with a list of plants that seemed to meet both criteria, and I actually received an EQIP grant from NRCS for this project, which I did complete earlier this fall. In the process, I fell really in love with our awesome native plants and altered the rest of my farm plans to include as many of them as possible. One great thing about native plants is that they grow really well naturally. They're from here, they like the soil that we have, they like the weather that we have. So they don't require a lot of sprays or a lot of irrigation. So they're pretty low maintenance, and that works really well for us. Also, the native plants work to support local wildlife and beneficial insects. Many insects require certain plants to complete their life cycle. And since the insects are native to here, they often require native plants. So by adding biodiversity to the land and growing a lot of those native plants, that allows us to create a great habitat for native wildlife. Native plant foods also can have interesting, nutritious, and enjoyable new flavors. I love to try new flavors, and when I first moved onto this land, one of the first things that I did was walk around and try to learn what were the names of the trees that were already growing on the property. And one of the trees we have is a mature shagbark hickory tree. And so I gathered up some nuts for it once I found that they were edible. And I cracked them open and I ate them, and my mind was totally blown at how delicious they were. And I couldn't believe that I'd never tried one before. Like, I never saw a hickory nut in the grocery store, even though it was so much more delicious than most of the other nuts that I had tried. So it's an interesting experience to try something new and enjoy a local flavor. I also think that by celebrating native plant foods, it gives us an opportunity to build truly local culture and add interest to our county and our state. It also gives us an opportunity to connect with the history of the land in a very personal and meaningful way by experiencing these foods. It's an opportunity to learn more about our natural history and also about the history and present state of the indigenous people of this land and their relationship with these plants and the many uses that they discovered for them. I have this quote. This comes from Judge Franklin Hardin from 1881. He was a surveyor that came in with the first colonial people who came to settle Indiana. He wrote about Johnson County. Tall trees covered the whole county with their wide-spreading branches, depending to the ground, and the shrubbery below arose and united with the branches of the trees. In the open space, in the valleys, grew either prickly ash or nettles, both equally armed with sharp, fiery prickles. Where the spicewood did not grow too thickly, male fern formed a solid mass 3 feet in depth, covering logs and pitfalls so completely. So we get a picture of this very lush place full of trees and prickly things. Maybe he didn't look too closely at it, maybe he did, I don't know. By contrast, we have this quote here from the indigenous perspective. This book comes from a book called The Miami Indians of Indiana, A Persistent People. This is an excellent book you can get at the library. It's highly recommend it. There were wild plums, strawberries, grapes, pawpaws, persimmons, crab apples, and many varieties of berries. The acorn of the bur oak, Indian potatoes, and tubers of the water chinkapin, arrowleaf, and Jerusalem artichoke supplied starch. Common milkweed, flowers of the mulberry, early shoots of skunk cabbage, sourdock, wild onion, and a number of other plants were prized as greens. Teas were made from spikenard, spiced bush, sassafras, and several other plants. And this quote is not exactly about Johnson County, but it's about very similar parts of Indiana with similar plant life. So I think it's all in the perspective, where one person sees wild wilderness, a trained eye who knows how to look can see a bounty of food. I also think it's important to note that in addition to enjoying this great buffet of local wild plant food, the Miami people were also skilled farmers, and they farmed corn, beans, and squash very successfully using the Three Sisters method. These foods, the corn, beans, and squash, they're all native to the Americas, and they are important cultural foods in the cuisines of Native people. And they are also wonderful crops that I personally enjoy growing in my own garden. I would certainly never downplay the importance of these foods or any other culturally significant foods or suggest that they shouldn't be grown here. However, these particular crops are not botanically native to our local bioregion. So there are multiple definitions of native food. And I just want to clarify that when I talk about native plant foods, I'm talking about foods that come from the native plants that originated in our local bioregion. And that definition does not include all of the plants that are included in Native American cuisine. So my intentions are coming from a conservation perspective and a desire to grow more of the plants that are native to our bioregion, rather than necessarily from a cultural perspective. Still, I don't think we can have a meaningful discussion about these plants without at least mentioning the people who stewarded them successfully for thousands of years and many generations. So now that we know what we're talking about, let's move on to the actual farm. This is an aerial view of our land. The total farm size is just a little over 10 acres. It's split up into several distinct segments, and each segment has different characteristics. Each one is suited to growing different kinds of crops. And each set of growing conditions has assets and challenges. So we have here, you can see this part of the farm is actually in a floodplain. It's in the Youngs Creek floodplain, which means that when Youngs Creek floods from Franklin, all the water from Franklin comes down south to me over near Amity and floods our field. We also have some wooded areas on the farm, which is a little bit unusual for a farm, I think. And part of the wooded area is actually on a steep ridge that divides the floodplain from the rest of the land. We also have these three sort of more regular open field kind of environments. Still, each one has its own challenges. And my biggest challenge in becoming the farmer over the past few years has really been about learning to embrace this land for what it really is. The farm may be small compared to my neighbor's farm, and woodlands and wetlands might not be considered typical ideal farmland, but with the right stewarding, I really believe that this land is becoming ever more wonderful, and I really believe there's a lot of potential here. The first field I want to talk about is the floodplain field. This field is about 2.5 acres. This is where I've spent the bulk of my time the last few years. We have some challenges here, obviously, with the floodplain. We battle with erosion, also debris. We get floodwaters with significant currents coming from the creek, and we have a fair amount of regular trash floats in, but also large objects. We've had a picnic table, a whole picnic table floated in and landed in this field one time. I found a 30-pound barbell weight one time. And I have quite a collection of empty fire extinguishers. So that can be a challenge because sometimes those larger debris items can crush our trees when they come in, and we've had some losses that way. Another big challenge with this field is mosquitoes. As you might imagine, any sort of stagnant water can very quickly become a breeding ground. So we've done some work to reduce that population there. At the same time, this field has a lot of assets. With those floodwaters, we get a lot of free fertility for the land. We also get free irrigation, natural irrigation. And as it turns out, this kind of ecosystem environment is a great home for many native plants. So we've been able to find a lot of great species that are very happy here. When we bought this land, this field, as well as all the other open fields, were planted in corn, as is the norm for this area. However, in this field specifically, the corn really didn't grow very well. It didn't like the stagnant water that was here, and the corn itself did very little to protect the soil from erosion. The roots are not very many or very deep. And so it just, the shallow roots didn't keep the soil aerated very well, and they didn't soak up very much water from the floods. So on the advice of Natural Resource Conservation Service, I decided to move towards a perennial planting for this land that would bring in as many plant roots as possible to try to conserve the topsoil we had left, and also to reduce the stagnant water situation. As I learned more and more about this field, I learned that floodplain forests are a very important natural ecosystem for Indiana, and they are worth protecting for their many attributes. That's probably the type of environment that would have been here originally, a forest type environment. So we kind of wanted to go back to that sort of situation from a conservation perspective. But still, I wanted it to be a farm. So I tried to achieve the best of both worlds by settling on this floodplain food forest concept. So the forest is, or the field is planted at forest density, meaning lots of trees, lots of shrubs, lots of herbs, but they're planted into manageable, tidy little rows, and all of the species that we added to the field are all native and also all food-producing plants. So I imagine it's sort of like a Willy Wonka kind of concept. You know, you're in this forest, but everything is food, and it's all like really exciting and fun. Of course, it hasn't grown up yet, so we're not really harvesting that much yet, but should start. Some of the crops should begin producing within the next couple of years. Since I began this wetland restoration planting effort, I find that water now drains much faster than it did when this land was planted with only corn. The deep-rooted trees aerate the soil and drink up the water, while the shallow-rooted grasses and other plants have very many roots, and they knit the soil together to protect it from erosion. Excuse me. The mosquitoes used to be so thick that I had to wear a mosquito netting suit just to go outside. But now, just by making these improvements, by providing some habitat for predators, increasing the drainage, and also by sprinkling a little bit of BTI, which is an organic approved bacteria that only harms mosquito larvae. I sprinkle a little bit of that into any stagnant water puddles that do arise. We can now totally enjoy being outdoors. Here are some examples of the plants that we've planted in this floodplain environment. Pecan, I'm sure you guys all recognize that one. It's an amazing native nut. Shellbark hickory. It's similar to the shagbark hickory, but the nut is larger and the shellbark is more flood tolerant. Red maple, you can make syrup out of that just like the sugar maple. American plum, American elder, it's elderberry. Spice bush, it's a great aromatic plant, teas and spices. High bush cranberry, excellent fruit. American hazel, hazelnut. Allegheny serviceberry, you might know that one by the name of Juneberry. Red mulberry, that's a great native mulberry. It's actually not the one that's everywhere, but a different one. Hackberry, swamp white oak, acorns are edible. Riverbank grape, it's a great native grape, and it's one of the most delicious ones for grape leaves, like making stuffed grape leaves. May pop, that's a native passion fruit. Corn mint, that's one of our native mints. Actually, I've got tea made out of it right now. It's really good. Blue vervain, it's a great native wildflower. Wild strawberry, another great fruit. Swamp rose, many food uses from roses. Purple giant hyssop, another great herb. And late goldenrod. So I've got all that stuff growing in this floodplain where, you know, admittedly, even when I moved in here, I didn't think very much was going to grow down there. So it's been really rewarding to see all of these different crops thriving in that system. Now, We also get asked often if this is actually going to produce a significant amount of food. And I really wanted to look into that. So in this chart, I've actually gone through and found the species that we've planted in the most quantity. And I've found out the average expected yields per year for one plant and multiplied that for the number that we've planted. So we figured out that it might be possible when the food forest is mature, we could maybe expect to harvest about 28,411 pounds of food per year from this 2.5 acres. Now, by contrast, or for reference, a similar size planting of corn could expect 24,192 pounds on average. So average to average, we think we can maybe produce even more quantity of food in this system than we could if we planted it in corn. I also want to talk about our wooded areas. That's another thing that's kind of unusual for a farm. When I first moved in, I really had a feeling like these woods were kind of in the way of my farm. But we have a lot of really beautiful mature trees in the woods, and wooded spaces can purify air and water. They can help to build healthy soil, and they provide habitat space for wildlife and beneficial insects. So you can see that keeping the woods as woods meets several of the core values and goals that I stated at the beginning of this talk. So of course we decided to keep the woods, but how to make it part of the farm, really. Ultimately what I decided to do is just to begin studying what we already have, learning the names of the trees that are already there, learning what they already offer and what uses can be found from them. I've been pleasantly surprised that many of them are already producing something that's very useful. One thing that I do intend to change about the wooded areas, so my goal for next year is to begin removing some of the invasive plants that are kind of taking over, like the bush honeysuckle. You have quite a lot of that, and it doesn't really provide very much value for us. So the plan is to start removing that, but then replacing them with useful native plants that could potentially give us a yield. And then the third way that we're integrating the woods into the farm is by beginning to cultivate shade-loving crops inside the woods. This is not a comprehensive list at all, but to give you an idea of some great native food crops that can grow in the woods. There are ramps. Ramps are a really great native allium in the onion family. Sometimes they're called wild leeks. I did a test sample planting of these about a year ago, and they've done pretty well. So I think I'm going to try to get more bulbs and try to expand that planting quite a bit. Fiddleheads. Fiddlehead is the young growth of the ostrich fern, and people cook it like asparagus. Herbs. There are very many edible and medicinal herbs that thrive in the woodland environment. Syrup, many of the trees you can tap. We have a lot of silver maples already there. It's maybe not the first choice for syrup, but you can totally make syrup out of it. So just kind of learning what's there and learning when you can extract some sweet syrup. Nuts from the canopy layer. So even though the woods is shaded at the bottom, it's not shaded at the top. The trees on the canopy layer are soaking up lots of sunshine and producing all kinds of nuts. So we find that we have black walnut trees that produce really good crops. We have hickory nut trees, which I've already mentioned. We also have some bur oak, which produces really delicious edible acorns. We have some beech nuts. So it's been kind of a learning journey of trying these things out and seeing what fruits can be enjoyed from them. And then the final way that we're considering integrating the woods into our farming system is by cultivating mushrooms. So you can actually gather up the downed limbs after a storm inside the woods and then cultivate them with spawn from some desirable mushroom that you hope to grow. Again, not a comprehensive list, but to give you an idea of some wonderful native crops that can grow along the woodland edge in that sort of part sun, part shade environment. Some really good ones already growing, like blackberries are already really well established on our properties. So since they're already doing so well, I'd love to add more of those and expand that into a market-sized planting. Similarly with black raspberries, they're already growing in all of our woodland borders. So just the goal is just to expand that and encourage more and more of them. Violets, not everybody knows you can eat violets, but all the above ground parts of the violet are edible. So the leaves and the flowers are really delicious added to salad. Red mulberry can grow in part shade. Grape, several wonderful varieties of native grape are available. Elderberry, spicebush, sassafras, the original root beer, wild strawberry, nettles. So there's quite a lot of options here, and spikenard is another one that I don't have in my list, but we've planted some of that too. One thing I'd like to share about the wild strawberry, there is a lookalike plant that is actually an introduced plant, not a native plant, called the mock strawberry, and it looks just like the native strawberry. The foliage is almost exactly the same, the flower is very similar, and the fruit looks similar, but the mock strawberry has no taste. It's actually all white on the inside instead of being red on the inside like a strawberry, and it's round instead of being strawberry shaped. Whereas the native strawberry, it's actually strawberry shaped, it's tiny, but it's strawberry shaped and it's red all the way through. So if you've tasted a tiny thing that you thought was a strawberry and it had no taste, please don't blame the wild strawberry for that, because it's getting unfairly maligned. Okay, so now we'll move on to these three drier, kind of more normal fields that we have. There's this long skinny one that's like right behind the house. This one is really great because of the location. It's really easy to access. It's close to our water source, so it's really easy to irrigate crops that are in this location. So this is the space where I'm currently building out a market garden. The market garden will contain a mixture of some native vegetables that I love, like the sunchoke, which is also called Jerusalem artichoke sometimes. I love that food. But also I want to include just some family favorites, that people know about, like tomatoes and peppers and cabbages. So the market garden will feature a mixture of those things. Also planning to grow a large herb garden in this space. And we're expanding a little bit every year. So this year was the beginning of the garden. It didn't get up to a big enough size to really justify marketing any of the produce, kind of more of a test planting this year. But the garden for next year is currently in the works, and it's working up to be about 3 times the size of the one we had this year. And the plan is just to increase the size little by little as we can every year. This is also the space where our chickens live. We have, as I mentioned at the beginning, 10 hens and 6 roosters. So they live in 3 separate coops, the hens by themselves, and then the roosters are split between 2 separate coops according to their temperament. And we use the chickens to help us generate compost and fertility, and also to clear the new space for next year's garden. So they're currently occupying a space that will be a garden in 2022, and preparing that by getting rid of some of the harmful insects and clearing out the weeds and pre-fertilizing. And this is also where we have our compost. So we do a lot of composting, compost all of the food scraps from the house, all of the bedding from the chickens, and also some compostable materials that we gather from the community. We brought in buckets and buckets of used coffee grounds from restaurants, and also leaf chips from residential areas. One challenge with this field is that we get herbicide drift coming from two sides. So the plan to remedy this is basically just to put in a privacy fence, which will be pretty solid and should block most of that drift. We also have this sort of strangely shaped field, sort of shaped like a piece of pie. This one is interesting because it's shaded on all the edges, but it's open and sunny in the middle. And the great thing about it is that it's totally protected. It's protected from wind, it's protected by herbicide drift. So this is going to be a really great place, I think, to grow grapes, which are very sensitive to those things. So we're planning to plant a native grape vineyard, and in the shadier spots, we'll do other kinds of native berries that are a little bit more shade tolerant. This pie-shaped field is also where our honeybees live. They also enjoy the protected area. And we don't have any sheep yet, but someday I really hope to get some. And the idea is that once all the grapevines and everything get established and really sturdy, then we could bring the sheep in to sort of graze the pasture grasses underneath them. And lastly, we have this great big field, which is really dry and really sunny. And this is the place where we're building out a native fruit and nut orchard. So we already have 50 pawpaw trees and 35 persimmons in this area. And there is plenty of room for many, many more. So continue adding to that a little bit every year. Also planning to eventually build a high tunnel, which will run just along the back side of that field. And that was actually Tony's idea from NRCS. He said that would be a great way to also sort of provide a growing climate for extending the season and maybe growing some trees that, prefer a little bit farther south of us, but at the same time, helping to block that herbicide drift, which comes from the neighboring field. Here are some examples of some of my favorite native food crops for sunny open spaces. The pawpaw, obviously I love the pawpaw because I've already said I planted 50 of them. It's our largest native fruit. Persimmon, another really great favorite. That's the one in the pictures there. Shagbark hickory, black walnut, American chestnut hybrid. And I say hybrid because the American chestnut used to be very ubiquitous throughout all of the eastern United States until this plant pathogen was introduced in 1904, caused a disease called the chestnut blight, which wiped out almost all of the American chestnuts. But there's been some really great work being done to build or to breed a hybrid chestnut between the Chinese chestnut, which has some blight resistance, and the American chestnut. So the goal would be to have a tree that has almost all the characteristics of the American chestnut, but retains the blight resistance from the Chinese chestnut. And they're currently have developed one that has 94% American chestnut DNA. and it's getting better every year. So I'd love to get some of those hybrid trees, which are very close to a native tree that's not available anymore. Summer grape is one of our wonderful native grape species. If you've ever tried a wine called Norton, the Norton wine grape is a selection from the summer grape. Fox grape is another wonderful native grape species. The Concord grape is a selection from fox grape. Sassafras as well. Sunchoke, also known as Jerusalem artichoke. Sunflower. Sugar maple. Lamb's quarter, it's a delicious green vegetable. It's related to spinach. Wild strawberry, strawberry spinach, another spinach relative. Herbs, many different kinds of herbs for food and medicine and pollinators. And native roses, which again, roses have a lot of great culinary uses. So now that you've seen the farm on this little virtual tour, you've probably noticed that we have lots of different things going on here, but none of the elements were chosen at random. So as you can see in this diagram, all of the elements we've chosen to include in the farm have an interconnected role to play in the farm ecosystem. It's kind of an expanded homestead concept. The goal is kind of to grow what my family needs, but also to grow more, enough to share, and more than that, enough to sell. And this sort of interconnected whole systems design approach is inspired, by permaculture design principles. So you can see in this chart, the farmer is in the middle, and the farmer does have to provide work and care to all of the systems in the farm, but the farmer is not the only one providing that work and care. Each element of the system also benefits at least one of the other elements, and they work together to reduce the amount of work that the farmer is doing while also increasing the potential for yield. The path ahead, we have some challenges ahead of us. The first challenge is time. Trees take a while to grow. Our earliest fruiting crops may begin fruiting at 4 years old. That's like the elderberry, the American plum, and the hazelnut. So that may happen in the next year or two. But some of the larger trees take 10 years or more. The shellbark hickory, for example, takes 40 years. So I'm just really hoping that, I still have my teeth then, so I can, I can try them, because that's really in a long time. So we will wait a while before we see this great harvest, but we should start to see something pretty soon. The next challenge is money. Tree crops, like I said, they take a while to grow, so they're not generating any income for us right now. Basically, I've been paying the bills from working off-farm jobs. I was working as a software engineer until pretty recently, and I still do a couple of odd jobs just to bring in a little bit of extra money on the side. And I think that situation is common to many farmers, especially beginning farmers. We're holding it together. And we also received a small EQIP grant from NRCS, which helped with some of our costs in buying the trees and the pasture seeds for our restorative plantings. Also beginning to offer some fast-growing winter crops and some handmade products to try to get some revenue flowing in from farm-related products. And then the last way that we're combating that is just by trying to stretch the budget, making every dollar count and growing slowly and with intention. The final challenge we're facing is the market. The foods that we're growing here are not necessarily already on many people's grocery lists. So there's a lot of work to be done in sharing the joy of these foods and generating interest. It isn't really food if nobody's going to eat it. So we're really hoping to be able to give away a lot of free tastes, organize some community events, and try to just start celebrating these foods together. There's been good success already with certain crops like the pawpaw, which is celebrated every September in Ohio with the Pawpaw Festival. Really good turnout every year there. It's a really fun time. So we're hoping that there's potential for some things like that in our local area. So if you're interested in some of these crops that I've been talking about today, there are some ways that you can contribute to spreading these plants around and sharing the joy of them. The first way that you can help is just by giving native plant foods a chance. If you get a chance to try one, try it. You know, look for them in the farmer's market. Seek out a pawpaw next September. Pick wild blackberries. Gather some hickory nuts and try cracking them open with a hammer. The next thing you can do is to make space for native plants in your yard or garden and try growing them organically. Think about the forest. Nobody sprays the forest. It's an opportunity to grow food without a lot of maintenance and add interest and increase biodiversity in your yard all at the same time. If you're at a position where you can advocate for more native food plants in public spaces, do so. Like I said, they're pretty easy care. They would be a good choice to have them around in public spaces and encourage public foraging. That really contributes, I think, to the feeling of abundance in our local area. We have a lot of native plants already in our local parks, but not a lot of food producing native plants. So think about, wouldn't it be so great if you could pick pawpaws next to the playground, or grab a handful of blackberries while you're on the bike trail. We could really do a lot more with native food plants in our public spaces. Also, I think it would be worth your time to learn something new about the indigenous people of Indiana. We know most of what we know about these food plants thanks to the careful stewardship and early research done by indigenous people. Many tribes are still active to this day and adding very positive things to the culture. And I also hope that you will visit our blog and stop by our booth at the Franklin Market next summer. Thank you.
Yay. Thank you, Laura. That was awesome. I'm sure there's going to be some questions. Chris, I see you're off mute.
Laura, thank you so much for coming. I got to tell you that I'm very excited to see this kind of farming going on in Franklin and in Johnson County, right? So this to me is like having Indiana's very own New Forest Farm, if you're familiar with that. Maybe you are. I don't know if some of the other folks are, but that's a very famous. Well, it's definitely what we're looking at here is a perfect example of permanent agriculture and a perennial agriculture like they do up at New Forest Farm up in Wisconsin, which, by the way, I don't know if you're familiar with them, Laura, but that's a good place to get hybrid chestnuts.
Okay, thank you. I will check that out.
The guy's name is Mark Shepard. If you don't know who, you probably know who he is, but I would highly recommend his book, Restoration Agriculture. And he's got a great book on water management too. He's a permaculture guy, but sort of in the Bill Mollison mold, basically, but with a lot of innovations. So yeah, he's all about chestnuts and hazelnuts. I noticed hazelnuts wasn't on your list. Do you have plans for hazelnuts?
Oh no, they are American hazel. We planted 200 of them in the floodplain area.
Okay.
So we have those.
Great. Well, no, to me, I just gotta say this. I didn't know you all were here. I really didn't. And to see this close in our backyard is amazing. So
Awesome. Thank you.
I will do everything I can to help promote what you're doing. What you said about the foods, I mean, that's that's a big issue. A lot of people don't realize that you can get great carbohydrates and great proteins from things like chestnuts and hazelnuts.
Yeah.
And you know, we think of farming in Indiana and food in Indiana as corn and soybean, and that's not food. I mean, corn can kind of be food. To me, soybean shouldn't be food, but that's another story. But we have the opportunity to grow so much of that kind of stuff, and here we got somebody showing us real good examples of it. I do have one other question. Are you going to be doing any kind of like alley cropping? Any of those sorts of techniques?
Well, we have a little bit of that going on in the floodplain area. We have our rows spaced at 12.5 feet apart, and the rows are planted with the trees and shrubs. And in between each row, we have these wild strips, which we let grow in grasses and just whatever comes up. But we also try to skew the population of those strips by seeding in native wildflowers. So that's sort of like an alley cropping, I think, except that it's not entirely a crop. It's sort of wild, but the herbs and wildflowers that we planted are ones that we can harvest. So we're kind of getting another crop there. It's also partly like for the honey crop, because we plant a lot of wildflowers that bloom during the dearth when the bees don't have much else to eat. So that really contributes to their yield as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, this is great. So that's what we're here for too, is to help promote things that people are doing to other people in the county and the surrounding area, and to understand that there's different kinds of agriculture and there's different kinds of food and there's diversity. I mean, the other great thing about your farm is that it's very biodiverse, and it looks like it's going to continue to get more biodiverse.
That's
And
the
that's
goal.
another thing that we don't see enough of, and we need every farm to have. Every farm should have 10% of their farm in insect-area strips or native beneficial or beneficial insect or native pollinator habitat, and they don't. There was a
And I think there's a lot of room to incorporate things like this into existing farms. My goal is, you know, if we can show that you can obtain a yield from some of these native plants, and that they can be productive and useful from a farm standpoint and not just a conservation standpoint, then, you know, maybe there could be sort of alley cropped kind of rows in regular farms. You know, maybe you have a 100-foot span of corn, and then maybe you have a 20-foot span of wild plums. I mean, why not? And the machinery could still get around it. And, you know, I think there's a lot of potential to add biodiversity to a lot of existing farm systems without giving up too much of what we already have.
Yeah, that's great. It's going to be a good example for people going forward. I mean, we'd love to. I'm already thinking we'd love next year to bring people down and show them what you're doing, because this is really good for us to have around here.
Awesome. Yeah, we're working towards getting it to a presentable place. But like I said, I was juggling a lot of things until last spring. I was working full time in Indianapolis and doing 2 other side jobs and running the farm. So we're kind of trying to clean it up a little bit before we invite people out. But we definitely want people to come out and see what we're doing.
Yeah,
so maybe in another year we'll be ready for that.
I'm not scheduling anything. I'm just but certainly, I mean, whenever you're ready, you know, I think it'd be wonderful. I think there's some other examples of people doing more permaculture type things, but right here in Johnson County, I don't think I've seen anybody doing anything this diverse. And with this many perennial crops, you hardly mention any annuals, and that's fine. And I know you're probably going to be doing more stuff with annuals, but people discount perennials, and they shouldn't. There's so much benefit from them. So I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, Chris is right along the lines of sort of where I wanted to touch base here in the last few minutes is from the council's perspective, that's our goal, is to showcase what's going on in our own county. And you hit so many of the pieces that we're interested in looking at with local sourcing and health and nutrition, education and awareness. You talk about all of that in your presentation. So I think I want to offer this opportunity to you to say, what can the council then do for you? We like to promote as much as we can. We do have a website where we can put the different farms and different anything that fits in those channels. Again, for like the nutrition and education, the food access and the local sourcing, try to promote those organizations or people that are just doing that. So aside from, if you want to be on the website, just let us know and we can definitely do it. But, future volunteer events, if you need help, with tree planting or anything, if you'd be interested in having a call out for volunteer opportunities on the farm, once you get to that place, that's an opportunity. If you have an education series that you want to promote, I follow your blog. I highly recommend it to everybody here on the council to follow it. It's very interesting. I love the way that you write. So it's very engaging and it's really educational, and it makes me drive to be more native in my own backyard. And it's not nearly that 10-acre property. It's a little tiny corner of the world, but it's nice to think about the things that I'm planning and what's their use and their purpose in my own backyard. So, just let us know what we can do to kind of help further your goals. And anytime you have a new topic that you think that you want to present on and you think would be interesting, you certainly know how to reach out to me or anybody on the council or go to their Facebook page. And we would certainly be glad to have you back. I know that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Sure. Does anybody else have any questions? I think we're almost right at time. We are. Okay. So Sarah, I think you were recording. I think we can stop the recording. And Laura, one last Thank you so much. This was really fantastic. So I don't know if we're going to get another public meeting in for the year. So if not, you kind of set up